Hello, my name is Margot Holm. I am the AAACN nurse scientist, and I am so excited to be here today with my colleagues, Dr. Elizabeth Fritz and Dr. Jessica Varghese from the Research Committee. This is a review of our session at the AAACN 2024 conference, Rapid Fire Dissemination Tips for Success. In this session, we will be presenting on 3 related topics for dissemination. First, writing a winning abstract. Second, creating an effective poster presentation. And 3, delivering a podium presentation with punch. So I will get us started with writing a winning abstract. And before we delve into that content, I will just say that this session is really focused on database abstracts. There are many different types of abstracts that could be submitted to a conference, but the focus of this session is really on dissemination of data-based projects. So exactly what is a winning what is involved in writing a winning abstract? Well, it's important to note that the road to dissemination always begins with a professional abstract. This is really the piece of writing that is critical for you to be able to frame the work that you did, the who, what, where, when, and how, to be able to describe its significance and its importance for dissemination to the audience of any conference that you would be submitting your abstract for consideration. And so an abstract really can be likened to an elevator speech, that opportunity that you have briefly when you run into a colleague you haven't seen for a while or a leader in the organization and they say, hey, what's up? This is really your cue to be able to spend the next 1 or 2 minutes giving them a high level overview of what your work is about. So we can think of an abstract as really a standalone piece of writing that does describe the who, what, where, when, and how. So the challenge before us, I alluded to this already, is to convey the significance or the so what factor. Why does this matter? And we can paint that picture so reviewers can see how important this particular problem and initiative was. So it's selected for prime time. So let's say that you've just recently completed a project and you're wondering, where should you present? Well, the first thing to consider is your target audience. Are you interested in reaching staff nurses? Maybe it's care managers, or maybe it's folks in other disciplines such as pharmacists or physicians, or maybe hospital executives or ambulatory health system executives. We also want you to think outside of the box, though. Who else might need to know your findings? So who are some of those other key stakeholders that may be in the finance department or in interprofessional circles, or again, at the leadership level? Who are the people that can really make or break and help you either sustain your work or scale it, possibly wider to other settings where it's applicable? So first, consider your target audience. Then think about the different conferences that these individuals attend. Maybe it's a local organizational conference that's held every year that highlights research and performance improvement work. Maybe it's the AAACN National Conference, or even the National Magnet Conference, or the Institute for Healthcare Improvement Conference. So once you've identified what some of those key conferences are, then you want to start thinking about how your topic fits, and also if your project fits the guidelines. So let's first talk about the topic. So you want to determine, as you're reading the call for abstracts, whether or not your topic fits the theme and the objectives of the conference. So sometimes conferences are very, general for research, EBP, performance improvement work. Sometimes conferences really have a particular topic of interest, such as health equity or social determinants of health. So again, you want to really understand how your work fits the objectives of what the conference is hoping to showcase. Then once you've identified that the topic, would align with the conference, then you need to get a sense of your project. Does it fit the guidelines? Some conferences will accept in-process projects, generally for poster presentations, but other conferences will only accept work that has not been previously published or previously presented, such as the American Heart Association or the Council on the Advancement of Nursing Science. Those conferences, they're really looking for late-breaking science because after all, most people attend a conference because they want to learn about what some of the newest discoveries are in their field, really, and not to review things that are well-known or standard of practice. So again, take a look at your topic and your project to determine if you believe that it fits the guidelines. Once you've checked that box, then it's time to really start studying the specific guidelines for the abstract development. So there'll be some general information on the call for abstracts that you need to pay attention to from the get-go. The number of authors, some conferences will limit it to 2 presenters, such as the Magnet Conference. Other conferences like the IHI limits it to 4 members of an interprofessional team. So you really need to understand that from the beginning, how many presenters are allowed. And then also the type of work. We've touched on this a little bit already. Is it the whole improvement gamut from research, EBP, and QI? Or is it more focused only on formal research projects? Then you want to key in on the formatting that is required for the abstract. Some conferences will have structured headings and even structured sections in a web-based portal where you'll copy and paste your information from your abstract. Other conferences, there are no prescribed headings, or it could even be an unstructured abstract with no headings. But I think it's always good to have some headings to break out the main sections. We'll get to that more in a few minutes. There may be some other formatting specifications, but for sure, key into the headings, and then there'll always be what the guidelines are for the length in either the word count or the character count that is allowed. I alluded to this again already. Many conferences now have website portals where you will go and input all of the information with your abstract and also upload author forms that are required to provide the conference with information about your title, your credentials, your expertise in this area, and even a conflict of interest form. So again, really pay attention to these guidelines before you start writing so you understand the whole process at the beginning. I'd like to share the story of some nurses that I worked with in a Magnet facility. They were super excited to share the results of an improvement project and didn't fully understand the process. And the lead presenter sat down at the computer a couple of hours before the deadline and didn't realize that her co-presenter would need to complete the author form before the abstract portal would even open up. So the ANA, ANCC requires that those forms are received first before you can actually submit your abstract. So they really lost the opportunity to submit because her co-presenter was out of town. And also the deadline, she didn't mind the time zone, and those abstracts were due at, I think it was 9 p.m. Eastern time, and on the West Coast, that meant it was 6 p.m. So really want to key in on these mechanics of the process early on. So now let's move and talk about the anatomy of an abstract. We're going to start off discussing the title. So there are some best practices around writing a title for your abstract. First of all, you want it to be eye-catching, right? You want it to capture the interest. First, the conference organizers, so they select your work. And then also, if it is selected for prime time, when it's in the conference proceeding lineup, you want it to catch the eye of your audience that you are hoping will come to your poster or to your session. So generally speaking, you want it to be short and succinct, but also informative. So generally 10 to 12 words is optimal. You want to use clear and concise language. You want to avoid any acronyms in the title. If there is an acronym, you need to spell it out. You also want to use specific terms and consistent terms. And it's important to focus on what the purpose of your project is rather than the results. So you want the title to clearly articulate what the purpose of the improvement work was, and then the results will be covered in the body of the abstract. So let's look at an example of a poor title. A study of stressors and burnout in the PC setting. The team practices mindfulness. Okay, you have to really read that a couple of times. There's some unnecessary words there. A study of, that doesn't add anything substantive. And we could guess that PC stands for primary care, but we're not sure. So it's just really kind of a convoluted title. A better choice would be, does mindful awareness alleviate burnout in primary care nurses? So we can clearly see the intervention is mindful awareness. The outcome of interest is burnout. We want to reduce that in primary care nurses. So now let's move on to the key messages of the abstract. So here I am recommending that you first outline the contents of your abstract. And again, there's no reason, I'm a perfectionist, but you don't need to, try to be perfect right out of the gate, because the best writing really occurs iteratively, where you write, you draft, and you rewrite, and you edit and polish it. So the key here is to get what are those takeaway messages for each of these sections. And most improvement work uses the IMRAD method, which stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. And then I tacked on the conclusion at the end. So in the introduction section here, you want to describe what the problem is that you're trying to solve and why it was needed and what was the purpose of the initiative. So you really want to describe the problem in about 1 to 2 sentences. And you can make it come alive by using statistics on the prevalence and the impact of that problem. So for instance, I recently conducted a study with my colleagues on the lived experience of ambulatory care nurses during the pandemic. So in the introduction section, we described the prevalence of stress and burnout and how it skyrocketed, right, during the pandemic. Or maybe you were working on an evidence-based practice project, like my colleague, Stephanie, on FIB4 screening to identify patients in primary care that were at risk for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. In her abstract, she included statistics on the number of people in the US with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, its morbidity, and economic impact. So by sharing these data succinctly, you really are painting that picture of why that initiative is so needed to improve care and patient outcomes. So with the purpose piece, you're going to describe, what you set out to do. And if it's a research project, here you would include your research questions or hypotheses or a purpose statement if you're working with an evidence-based practice or QI project. Moving on to the methods section, here you want to explain what did you do and how you did it. So in that lived experience study, we described the number of nurses that we interviewed, the type of interview that we conducted with them, and how we analyzed the data. In the FIB4 screening project, my colleague explained the chart reviews that she conducted and the reports that she ran to verify that those screening labs were done and retrieved. The results section is the meatiest part of your abstract. You want to allow more sentences to this section, again, to that point of people are really interested in understanding new findings that come from your work. So in the results section, you want to offer kind of a high-level summary. You don't want to get too much into the weeds, but you do want to provide some of those key qualitative or quantitative findings. So in that lived experience study, we described the themes that we derived from those narrative interviews. And in the FIB4 screening, my colleague described the number of patients that she screened and the number of patients that were referred on to the GI clinic based on those laboratory findings. And then lastly, in the discussion and conclusion section, here you have an opportunity to really tell the reader what are the implications of your work for practice, for education, or for leadership. Maybe it touches on all three of those or only on one or a couple. And then you, of course, want to relay what are the recommendations for further research or the lessons learned. If this is QI and you want to help someone in another institution adapt or adopt your work, what are the lessons learned that they could then take for their work? And then the conclusion. Here you want to tell the reader briefly, 1 or 2 sentences, what are the take-home messages? You want to recap the results and again, what they mean and any recommendations of those issues that were identified. So now that we have outlined our key messages, we can set that aside and let it sit for a while and percolate, and then come back to it with fresh eyes and take those key messages and start crafting a draft of your abstract. Again, no need to be perfect out of the gate. You want to do a draft abstract and let it sit. Have some of your colleagues review it to give you some critical feedback. And then you can go back again with fresh eyes again and polish it before you submit it. So finally, I'd like to leave you with some abstract do's and don'ts. The first thing I would say is don't wait until the last minute to start. You do want to follow those guidelines. If you write in an active voice, it will be more interesting and it will also allow you to write in shorter, simpler sentences. You want to use simple and consistent language, avoid excessive jargon or acronyms. And generally, you do not include tables or figures in an abstract. You leave that for your poster or your podium slides. You may include some references if they're required, but generally abstracts, the narrative is not peppered with a lot of references. There might be some key references. You do critically want to review your abstract and make sure all of your content is congruent and logically linked. So reading it through from the background of the problem to the purpose or the aims, the methods that you use, the results and the conclusion, all of that should be very tight and convey a congruent message. You also don't want to fail to proofread your abstract, right? This is your opportunity to shine as a professional. And so you need to make sure that you check it for spelling and for grammar because you want to present yourself in the best possible light to the conference organizers. You also want to make sure that you mind those deadlines right and ensure all of your co-authors have approved that final version. So in closing, a well-crafted abstract is an art. Like any skill, it takes practice. And so I have some tips for success that have worked for me. First, plan ahead, really get under the hood and understand, what is involved, what is the timeline. Then invest the time. Don't expect to write a perfect abstract, sitting down in one session. So invest the time, refine it and polish it based on the feedback that you receive from your colleagues. And if you follow these tips, I think it will really up your chances of creating that winning abstract, giving you that opportunity to disseminate your work as a poster or a podium presentation at the conference of your choice. So now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Elizabeth Fritz, who will share pearls for creating an effective poster presentation.
Thank you, Margot. So you have crafted that abstract that is a work of art. It's beautiful. The conference committee wisely saw how beautiful your abstract was and selected it for a poster, and they send you your notification. Congratulations, you get a poster. And then suddenly you realize, oh, I have to actually create the poster now. What goes on a poster? How do I create it? What should it look like? So we're going to talk a little bit about content selection and design principles for creating an effective and engaging poster. So to begin with, if the conference instructions gave you specific instructions, like make sure you include your email address, or for EVP initiatives, we want to see these headers, but for research, we want to see those headers, make sure you follow those instructions. That's the first step. Beyond that, take that abstract that you wrote, and I do strongly recommend that when you write an abstract, you save a copy of it before you submit, because with an electronic submission, sometimes it goes away and you can't find it again. So take your copy that you've saved of your abstract and remind yourself what it was you said you were going to put on a poster. That'll be a good starting point. A lot of what you put in that abstract that you already wrote so beautifully, so concisely, you can cut and paste directly into the sections of your poster. And then you're going to tweak it a little bit. But as a starter, if you just take what you had in your abstract and plop it into the sections that you're planning for your poster, that'll give you a really good start. Bear in mind that often you have a large project and you only have one poster, and however long people want to stop by your poster and talk to you, it is okay to pick out just a subset of the project to present in your poster. So don't feel like you have to cover every last detail. That's going to come later when you move it to a manuscript. But for now, for the poster, pick up the most helpful pieces that the audience at this event is going to benefit from. Usually it's a lot of outcomes, implications, how exactly did we do it? So try to think about what's going to be value added for the people attending and narrow in on that. As an example, right now I have a project with a ton of data from over 9,000 nurses in the system where I work from every care setting imaginable. If I were to present a poster on the results of this data for AAACN, I would just take the subset of data from the ambulatory care nurses. And instead of trying to explain the whole project, I would just share the piece that is relevant for ambulatory. So think about that. Another really helpful thing to do is use a poster template. Some of your organizations might have a template that you're expected to use. So talk to your marketing department and find out if that's already something you have. If not, there are a lot of free poster templates available online. Pretty much all of the poster printing companies will offer templates. So those are easy to find and they can be really, really helpful. I strongly recommend using a template rather than trying to start from scratch. Templates are going to give you some basic section headers like that IMRAD that Margot talked about in the abstract. You'll often see the same set of headers, introduction, methods, results, and discussion in your templates. But bear in mind, this is your project and your poster, so you are allowed to edit, delete, change, move around, whatever you want from that starting template. But that can be a good place to start with thinking about the basic sections to include in most posters. A poster is not a manuscript and it doesn't have a lot of room. So you're going to have to be succinct. You can't share every last nuance and detail, but what you can do with the poster is pique somebody's interest. Give them a high-level overview, share your outcomes, and invite some ongoing conversation about your topic. So because you have limited space on the poster itself, you're going to want to use bullet points instead of full paragraphs. Use, again, that active, concise type of language. And then think about leaving white space on your poster. It's easier on people's eyes if they're not just looking at walls of text. So a little bit of white space around your sections. And then charts, graphs, sometimes even photos can be really helpful to break it up a little bit and help people get a visual of what you're talking about instead of having to read all the narrative. So those kind of things are really helpful on your poster. Most people at the poster event are going to kind of skim your poster and move along to the next one. And that's fine. There's always lots of posters to look at. Some people will stop and chat with you for a few minutes, or they'll stop and just quietly read through your poster. And an even smaller number of people are going to want to follow up with you later. They'll want more details. They're thinking about how to go back and implement it in their own place, and they want to follow up to ask some questions or ask if they can use a copy of a tool that you created. So for those people, you need to leave some breadcrumbs, which is what I call a trail of cues or resources to facilitate that post-conference action. So that might look like a QR code that you put to your reference list, or a QR code to a form, a spreadsheet, some other shareable document that you talked about in your poster that you're willing to let other people use as a template for their own work. Or a breadcrumb might just be your own email address to make sure that people can reach you if they want to have a follow-up conversation. So think about putting those kinds of things on your poster. And then bear in mind that if this project made a good poster, there's a good chance that it will also make a great manuscript. So once you've presented at convention, start thinking about how you can take, again, that same abstract that's already well written, plus the charts and tables that you developed for your poster, and how you can use those to then start developing your article. So that's probably enough to go on with for content. Let's talk a little bit about how to make your poster pretty, visually appealing, and useful. So for design and format, you want to think about the context of a typical poster event. You have this huge room, long rows of posters. Usually they're standing rows, so just kind of like long aisles with people everywhere. And somebody walks into that room and is looking around going, where do I even start? Maybe the posters closest to the entrance already have lots of people at them, so I kind of want to start somewhere else. You want them to be able to see from a good distance the title of your poster and say, ooh, that one looks interesting. I'm headed that direction. And then as they come in closer, maybe you're already talking to somebody, or there's a little knot of people in the way and they can't quite get to you. So they're just going to hold back and read a little bit patiently while waiting until they can come in closer. You want the text on your poster to be legible from a few feet away. So that's why when you think about font size, your title should be really big. The literature says 60 to 80 point. I have always used 72, and that has worked really well for me. So somewhere in that 60 to 80 range, 72 is great. And then for the text, it's always a balancing act between getting everything you need to put on your poster and also keeping the font large enough. Try for about a 40 to 44 point font if you can. I've also used 36. It's pretty good, but somewhere around that 40 spot is the sweet spot for your main text. And then again, use templates. Another reason why you should use a template is that often they will come already sized in aspect ratios that will allow you to pick something that'll print out and look good in the space that you have. So if you go back again to those instructions you received when you first got your notification, congratulations, you get a poster. Somewhere in that email, they probably told you what your poster size limit is, and that's the size of the board on which you are going to be posting this poster. That's really important to know because you get to decide what size poster you're going to have printed, and your goal is to use your space and not use anybody else's space. So use as much of the room as you can without having overhang, without going off the sides or the top or bottom of your board. So use that information about what size board you'll have available to then choose the aspect ratio you want to download of template so that when you go to print it, it'll actually look good in that sizing. That'll make more sense once you actually are doing it. And then think about as well with printing, what are you going to have it printed on? When you go to have your poster printed, you'll usually have several options. You might have matte, which is just your basic ink on paper. It's not shiny or glossy or fancy, but it does the trick. It's generally pretty inexpensive, and it's what most people do. So your poster will look perfectly fine and in keeping with other posters around it if you go with that most inexpensive option, basic matte paper. Your next option will usually be semi-gloss or gloss. That's a little heavier paper. It's shiny. From a distance, it kind of stands out a little bit more. It also costs a little bit more. So that's your choice. What do you value more? Um, but I would say the last option is definitely worth considering if you are flying, and that is fabric. A lot of poster printing companies will offer fabric. It definitely costs more than paper, but it has the advantage of being something you can fold up your whole poster and fit it in your carry-on and not be worrying about your poster tube and whether it's going to fit the airline requirements and whether it's going to whack the person behind you because it's unwieldy to carry in line. It just is much easier to fly with a fabric poster that you can fold up. So if you can swing it or get your organization to pay for the printing cost, consider going for fabric if you're traveling by air. And then along with that, and again, back to that instructions email you received, your instructions should also tell you whether you are supposed to bring your push pins or whether the conference organizers will be providing that. It's very important you double check that, because if you were supposed to bring them, you're going to get there and you won't be able to hang your poster if you don't have some push pins. So make sure you know if you're supposed to bring them. And if you are, consider bringing extra, because inevitably one of your neighbors will have missed that point and you can be their hero and share some. So if you're bringing pins, bring plenty to share. People will love you. And then there are some other accessories you might consider. They're not mandatory, but it is common practice to bring a stack of your own business cards, and sometimes a small stack of extra copies of your poster. So this is less common now that we have more virtual events or conferences. Often now we'll put a PDF of every poster on the conference app or on the conference website. But a lot of people are old school and really like the feel of being able to walk away with an actual hard copy, especially if they are in that subset of viewers who really actually want to go back and replicate this project in their own home site and want to be able to refer back to that easily. So consider bringing a small stack of just basic black and white 8.5 by 11 little copies of what you have on your poster in full color. And then pro tip with the business cards: when you're exchanging cards with somebody because you had this great conversation and you want to follow up in a couple of weeks and talk about how further to implement in their home site what you were using, before you hand out that card, take a minute to jot down just a little tiny note, or when you receive their card, a little note to remind yourself later what you talked about. Because 3 weeks later, when you're going through your pocket full of cards and you have a dozen of them, you're going to have no idea who you talked to about which topic and why you exchanged cards and what it was that you said you would follow up on. You will thank yourself if you just put a little note like, talk about students in ambulatory care, or talked about residency programs, something like that, so that you remember what it was that you wanted to connect about later. So those are some considerations for preparing for a poster, but some of you are going to get that congratulations notice that you've been selected for a podium presentation. And so for that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jessica Verghese, to talk about I am trying to give up control, but I accidentally went forward in the slides
No worries.
to talk about doing that oral presentation.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Um, I am excited to share with you some tips related to podium presentations. I think poster presentations have an excellent place. It's a great opportunity to kind of get started. But once you have a podium presentation, you're at a place where you feel like you've got a good amount of content you'd like to share that just doesn't fit into a poster. So one of the first things that you want to do is make sure that you know your audience. Depending on who you're talking to, you need to make sure you can modify your presentation. So if you're talking to seasoned nurses versus nursing students, you want to make sure you know the population of people that you're presenting to. Have a goal. What is it exactly that you want to convey in your presentation? And make sure that's clear and set up right from the start. Having structure is very important. As you present, you want to have a clear idea of where you're going, and you also want to make sure your listener can follow you on that journey. Most important is practicing. It takes a great deal of practice, just like anything else in life. The more you practice it and rehearse it at home in front of a mirror, in front of your family, the more confident you will feel with the material, and the more likely your presentation will flow when you're on that stage. One other thing that's important is to be able to manage your time. So if it's a 10-minute presentation, you want to be respectful of that and be able to allocate adequate time so you don't feel rushed at the end to get through your slides. It's very important to prepare for questions, and we'll go into that a little bit in the presentation. But expect that there will be questions and sort of prepare yourself for that as well. The use of body language is critical in your presentation. So how do we set up a podium presentation? One of the first things that you want to do is make sure that it is clear right from the start with your title slide, right? In your title slide, you're going to succinctly explain what your topic area is. If you have any disclosures, depending on where you work, or any conflicts of interest, that would need to be presented right from the beginning. You want to start with your purpose or your hypotheses, and state, what are the issues and challenges in this area that you will be exploring. Really, the basis of your presentation is that purpose statement, right? I will argue that, or maybe you're comparing something or evaluating something. Those are the things that you want to make sure you put in your purpose statement. You should also include what you're hoping the outcome of the presentation will be. For example, I'm hoping this will provide you with X, Y, and Z. The materials and methods that you use, if this is a research study, you want to make sure that's included. What the results were of your study and the discussion that goes along with it is also key. Sometimes it's also a good idea as you start to state whether or not you want audience interaction. Some presenters prefer the audience to ask questions throughout, where others allocate a specific section at the end of the presentation. It's also a good idea to inform the audience whether they should take notes or whether you'll be providing them with handouts. So some tips related to PowerPoint. PowerPoint tends to be the main method through which we do presentations. One of the first things that you want to do is make sure that you understand that your slides are there to assist your speech. It's really not the focal point. You don't have to put all your information there because that really distracts people from hearing what you have to say, right? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So instead of filling a slide with text, try to put 2 or 3 images or diagrams to help explain what is the point that you're discussing. Make sure they're readable, depending on the size of your audience. If you use small text or images, it will be hard for them. So make sure that things are large enough to fill the space. Don't rush through the slides. Give the audience enough time to digest each slide. There's a 6x6 PowerPoint rule, which suggests that a presentation shouldn't have more than 6 words per line and no more than 6 bullet points per slide, right? So we want the slides to be readable yet informative. So preparation in advance, it's sort of important to know what to wear. You want to make sure that you present yourself in a professional manner, which includes understanding the audience that you're presenting to. So one thing that I would say is, maybe take a look at the conferences before and how people dressed. And if in doubt, always go with a more formal approach. You also don't want to wear things that can distract the audience, right? So try to keep it simple and clean. So some preparation tips for when you get on site, right? Make sure you get to the presentation room early. This allows you to get your emotions under control and really mentally visualize a successful presentation. Sometimes, if you're nervous, it's a good idea to introduce yourself to the moderator and make sure that they can pronounce your name. If there's anything in terms of administrative details that you need to do, going early will give you that opportunity to set that record straight. With AV equipment, you want to make sure that, you stand at the podium and you're familiar with the equipment. Make sure that the microphone is adjusted or positioned to the right place. If you need to turn on and off, you know how to adjust the volume. If you have visual, right, you want to make sure you practice going through those slides. Make sure they're in the right order and they're right side up. Do you know how to go backward and forward? Are they projecting well? That's always a very important thing. If it's possible, having an assistant or a colleague in the room can be beneficial, right? They can help distribute handouts. If there's problems, they can bring it to your attention. So if you're not speaking loudly enough or your slides are advancing too fast, having someone in the audience to give you that feedback can be helpful. And lastly, observe the audience, right? So if take a look and see how the audience is responding to other presenters. This can help you in terms of modifying your presentation to fit the moods and interests of the audience. It is really important to deliver your message in a clear and succinct manner. If you pay attention to these details, it really creates an atmosphere where people can tell, oh, this person really took the time to work on this presentation and prepare in advance. So delivering the presentation. One of the most important things is making sure you know your material, right? So when you start, introduce yourself to the audience and clarify who you are and your relevant expertise. It doesn't need to be long or incredibly detailed, but you want to set the stage to say, here's how I bring my experience and clarify why you're worth listening to, right? So this creates a trust with your audience and your credibility is increased. So always make sure that when you're speaking to the audience, you're facing them. Make sure you don't turn around and look at your slides while you're presenting. Transitioning of slides is also an important thing, right? So when you're speaking, you want to say, first, I'd like to begin with, and then go into next, I'd like to cover. So these speech transitions are an important part of your presentation. You want to make sure you speak loudly and clearly and have, bring your personality into the presentation. Show that you're passionate about the topic. But be mindful not to talk too quickly, right? So it's sort of finding that balance between the two. That's very important during the delivery of a presentation. And then when it comes time, you want to make sure that if there is a silence, that's okay. Learning how to use pauses in your presentation can be very beneficial. If you're talking about something really exciting, it's okay to change your voice pitch and say, hey, this is really important because A, B, and C. You want to make sure at the end you are summarizing what the point of the presentation was, and also have that firm closing, right? This is the great way to kind of just say that here's what I came out to present, and here's what I'm hoping you got out of my presentation. And always make sure you thank the audience for their attention. At the end of presentations, very often you leave some time for questions. You want to make sure that you listen carefully and answer only the question that was asked, right? Be as concise as possible. If the questioner is not using a microphone, you want to restate the question. Chances are that the rest of the audience didn't hear the question. If the question is complex and you don't understand it, have the questioner restate the question. If the restatement of the question doesn't help you, it's really up to you to say, I think what you're asking is X, Y, and Z. If the question seems particularly aggressive or awkward, be polite in your response. The audience will naturally side with you if you are seen as respectful. Don't get into debates during the question period. If there's controversy after you've answered the question, you can say to the questioner, let's talk after the presentation is over. Finally, if you don't know the answer to the question, compliment the questioner for his or her good question, admit that you don't know the answer, and then keep it moving. These are our references. And then lastly, if you'd like to contact us, we've put our contact information on the slide. We look forward to hearing from you if you do have questions related to developing an abstract or a poster or a podium presentation. Thank you again for taking the time to meet with us, and have a great day.